right, I'll call the Sherwood School Board to order for May 26, 2021. Please stand. Join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first up is public comment. Ms. Andrick.
Okay, give me just a second here.
Oh, and just to review the ground rules, these are limited to 3 minutes, and so Christine will read them until and unless she gets to the 3-minute mark and stop at that point and move on to the next one. Go for it.
Great, thank you. All right, Michael Jones, 18282 Southwest Mirror Court. With the recent new hire of a Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Sherwood School District, what data or metrics could you share that indicate there is a need for a Director of DEI? There are other school districts within Oregon who have higher number of students that are more homogeneous than Sherwood, and yet they don't see a need for a DEI director. What is the primary responsibility of this new director? Is there a reason current employees cannot cover these responsibilities? In a district that is constantly asking for more funding, why should we support more administrative overhead? I am not alone when I say the money could be spent better elsewhere. Thank you for your time. Camille Burris, 15848 Southwest Division Street, Sherwood. Middle high school social studies curriculum. I strongly oppose the public funding or the teaching of curriculum that teaches critical race theory. The material attached to today's board hearing states it will tell a variety of perspectives and stories, introduce students to truths about culture through fictional stories, develop skills in nonfiction reading and writing, etc. It does not provide sufficient evidence that true history void of social interpretation will be delivered to our children. The Sherwood School District needs to ensure that history and facts are taught accurately in a fact-based way, not in an ideological-based way. Thank you. Steve Holthouse, 16780 Southwest Stellar Drive. As a Sherwood property taxpayer, I would like to access school curricula, both proposed and in use, in the Sherwood Public Schools. I think this would be valuable for parents and other interested parties to learn exactly what is being taught in the schools. I understand that the documents attached to the proposed middle school social studies curricula are very general in nature. I suppose the district office is a good starting place unless you care to offer some help there. Lindsay Broderick, 16934 Southwest King Richard Court, Sherwood. Information so far has been vague and very open to interpretation. How much room for interpretation do teachers have? Is there a scripted curriculum? And given the sensitive nature and political nature of the subject, will students be allowed to opt out? Historically, social studies has been a neglected subject, often overlooked in state testing and therefore not given extra resources. ODE seems to be giving more attention to the subject, but in a clearly political way. I object this. The best social studies teachers I ever had were politically neutral. They often switched sides in classroom discussions with the goal of encouraging students to think for themselves. I am not convinced that this is the objective anymore. This concerns me as a parent. I understand that districts are subject to ODE guidelines. However, we must fight to remain neutral. Schools are a powerful tool to teach children to think, and misused, they are also a powerful tool to indoctrinate. I hope and encourage this district to remain on the path of neutrality, encouraging our children to think for themselves. That will be the biggest tool for change this world has ever seen. Thank you, Lindsay Broderick. Steve and Stacy Robertson, Sherwood, Oregon. Sherwood is going full steam ahead with its diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. Sadly, DEI is often used as cover to bring critical race theory and other related social justice ideologies into the school. CRT and the anti-racism agenda treats the races as monolithic identity groups with their own generalized attributes. For example, all whites are participants in an inherently racist whiteness culture and are labeled as oppressors, and all BIPOC folks are victims and should be constantly on the lookout for racial oppression. These teachings are the exact opposite of the universalism of MLK's appeal for a human rights-based society. CRT turns MLK's message on its head. Don't judge people by the content of their character, but instead judge them by their race. We keep hearing from our board about the systemic racism in our schools, racism that was so pervasive that it went unnoticed all these years under their watch. But the true systemic racism is the new CRT-based racism, which comes fully endorsed by the education establishment. It's state-sanctioned systemic racism. This ideology teaches white students that they need to continually work to absolve themselves of their whiteness and atone for their oppressive tendencies. But perhaps most troubling is the message being sent to minority students. They're taught to think of themselves as victims because the entire system and overall culture is stacked against them. Doesn't this seem to be a recipe for resentment and lack of empowerment? Instead of hearing the message that they should dream big, work hard, and become anything they want to be, the message instead is focus on agitating against the system that keeps you down. And how can this possibly work to increase trust and goodwill between the different racial groups? Aren't we teaching our kids that everything is horrible, including their own country, and needs to be disrupted and dismantled? What a depressing and destructive message. Parents across the nation are discovering the true nature of this racist political ideology, and many states are banning it in their K-12 schools. Has anyone on our board even considered listening to the increasing number of compelling arguments against this radical ideology? There are plenty of concerns from all races from across the political spectrum. The public schools belong to all of us. For too long, this radical agenda has been seeping into our schools, mostly under the radar. We cannot allow this dangerous ideology to totally hijack our schools, turning them into Maoist-style indoctrination centers. If enough of us start demanding the removal of this toxic agenda, we can bring back fairness and excellence in education. And that concludes public comment.
Thank you very much. Next up is multi-tiered systems of support discussion. Mr. Bennett and a cast of others.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Excuse me. Tonight, Chair Allen, Board of Directors, Superintendent Cordy. Tonight, we're excited to talk to you about our multi-tiered system of supports. Sandra will pull up the slideshow in just a second. I have the slide. Okay, sorry, I'm on track. So tonight we want to talk to you about three things related to this. Sorry. Our multi-tiered system of support is the main topic, but within that, there's a couple of other topics. You might recall just about a year ago today, or a year and a couple months ago today, on the eve of the pandemic, we talked about our student investment account plan. And one of the chief strategies in that was a multi-tiered system of support. And related to that, our collaborative learning team. So tonight we're going to talk to you about these three areas in this presentation. The student investment account is about $1.7 million in new investments for the next school year. Their investments focus on decreasing disparities in achievement, mental health, and offering a well-rounded education for our kids. We'll share much more with you about this next week at the Budget Committee meeting a week from today. But in short, the investments all come from the SIA plan that was approved by the board in March of last year. You might recall that evening, right before school shut down, we approved an SIA plan. That was a 2-year plan, and the investments all come from that. And they include a variety of new positions based on those areas I just mentioned. When we were hiring all these new positions, we wanted to invoke a strategy that was really evidence-based to make sure we deployed these resources and our current resources in the most effective way to make the biggest bang for our buck and have the biggest impact on kids. And MTSS, a multi-tiered system of supports, was the strategy we chose, and you'll learn a little bit more about that tonight. As a part of this system, we'll also be talking about collaborative learning teams and a request to maintain what we've done this year and having teachers be able to collaborate weekly for an hour as opposed to what we've done in the past every other week for 2 hours. So that'll be part of our conversation as well. And on that, I'm going to turn it over to, yes, Director Adamson.
Sorry, I didn't ask this question in advance, but just for anybody watching at home, when we put together that student investment account plan, did that involve community engagement in any way?
Yeah, that included a lot of community engagement. In fact, we'll talk about that more next week, but we surveyed stakeholders. We started in September. We didn't finish the plan until March. We surveyed stakeholders in several times. We met with different groups. We went through a strategic planning process that included community members, parents, teachers, administrators, board members, classified staff, and all of that data collectively informed what we decided to do with that money. So I appreciate the question, and that's a really important point. But we went through an extensive process, and all of the investments we're proposing making this year come from that same process and that same engagement, and some ongoing engagement we've done since then. Thank you for the question. On that, I'll turn it over to Marlene. Or no, Josh, I'm sorry. I'm a little confused tonight. I apologize.
Good evening. I want to talk a little bit about what MTSS is. Oops, this way. Pull this down. So multi-tier systems of support provides an educational framework. It's not a curriculum. It's not a pedagogy, but it's a framework of how we actually deploy our resources in schools to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students. It's highly research-based, and it targets each student as a whole child. So it's not just one area of the curriculum, but it's actually academic, behavioral, and social emotional needs. So again, that whole child aspect. Yes. Okay. All right. Why MTSS? So this is really important to understand. We know that not all kids learn at the same rate. We know that no two kids need the same thing. Some of our students may struggle to keep pace with instruction. Others may really exceed and need challenges or extensions so that they continue to expand their learning. And so when we use an MTSS framework, what that does is it's a district-wide approach that is aligned and consistent. It's structured. We want to be able to build a model that carries our kids all the way from kindergarten through high school, so that it's not that when kids transition from one grade level to another, that somehow we have to get to know them again, but that we're looking at that whole targeted systemic approach and really doing the right work in the right time and the right place with our kids. MTSS is supported by research. John Hattie is a very famous researcher. He has done metacognitive analysis of hundreds of research studies across education. And one of the things that he has found is that MTSS, or the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support framework, that approach is one of the top 5 most effective strategies with schools. In fact, not only is it one of the most top-tiered approaches to make changes and help our students grow and learn, but the effect size is 1.29. What does that mean? When we talk about students' growth over the course of a year, we want students to make a year's worth of growth, 1. Most research-based instructional strategies in schools have actually less than a half a year growth by themselves, which is why we have to put multiple pieces in place. When you use a multi-tiered system of support, look at that in 1 year, just by using this framework, not even getting into other strategies or interventions that we're using, the typical student makes 1 1/3 years growth in 1 year, just by having this framework. It also helps us to have efficiency in deploying staff, because we want to be cost effective. We don't want to just be hiring people. We want to make sure we're hiring the right people, we're deploying them to where they need to be. And that's why we tie into the student investment account. So some big ideas that drive the MTSS idea. Oftentimes we think about teachers going in and they teach the curriculum, and we talk a lot about what curriculum we're using. In an MTSS model, we're actually kind of flipping that. We're going from teaching to what I say is learning. We're making sure that students are learning, not just that the student's in the desk and you're going through the curriculum, but we're measuring and looking at that student's progress to make sure that they actually got the content that we're trying to teach. And in the case of many students, they may already have those skills. So rather than taking time to teach something they already know, we're going to expand upon that. That's that extension piece. That's why it matches or meets the needs of all of our students. It also creates a collaborative culture. And so that's why we're going to be talking a little bit more about our CLTs and that time to be able for teachers to collaborate and focus on student learning. How do we move our students forward? And of course, most importantly, it's evidence-based. We want to make sure that our students are learning. That's what we're all here for. I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, but sometimes when you hear that title MTSS, you'll hear people talk about the triangle or the tiers of support. Really what this gets into is tier one. We want to make sure that each and every one of our students in the district are receiving research-based core instruction. That's it. Solid piece for all of our students in all of those areas. Again, back to the whole child, academic, behavioral, social, emotional. And then for those students that are at the top of the triangle or need additional supports, that we have those available to them. Whether that's extra support in reading or math, or maybe the child and their family is needing some additional supports around mental health, all of those services are available. And I'm going to pass it on to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cordy, Board Chair Allen, and Board of Directors. So you heard a little bit about MTSS, and now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how it's founded on, a series of teams that make it really run effectively and efficiently. And so we have a district level MTSS team, and that's the guiding coalition for the school district. It's kind of thinking about it as the pulse of the district. You have representatives from a variety of schools and a variety of positions, and that kind of shapes and lets us know what's going on so that we're moving all together towards this purpose of meeting students and serving them in the best way possible. And then we have school level teams, and within each school level team, essentially there's 3 teams that do the work. There's the school leadership team, which is similar, but it's the guiding coalition for the schools. There's the collaborative learning team, and that's teams of teachers. And then there's the school intervention teams, talking about that tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. Okay. So the collaborative learning team is kind of the main thing that we want to discuss tonight. And the collaborative learning team in an effective MTSS system, it's really establishing this belief that that the school can really make change in students' learning. So Josh mentioned that just the MTSS system in and of itself has this effect size where it's a growth in 1/3, but having CLTs that have this belief, teachers who believe that they can move the dial, it actually shows, the research shows that you can make a 1.5 year growth with that, just establishing this team and all working together for the same purpose. And so it's composed of educators, right? It's either, maybe it's a content area or a grade or a specialty. And then that team really works together to improve student learning, and they're aligning learning targets and assessments. They're identifying students needing really timely and targeted support. So when we identify that we have students who need something, we immediately address the issue and reteach. And then it's extending learning opportunities for students who are proficient. We know that we have students that come to us that they already know and have mastered the standards. And so it's looking at those students and seeing what are we doing in addition to just the grade level content. Multitasking. Okay, so we are proposing that, right now we have our collaborative learning teams, and in our current practice of meeting once or twice each month, we're really seeing that the implementation of MTSS will be less effective because we're just not meeting enough to move the system forward. And then we're also finding that collaboration is challenging when you're only meeting twice a month, right? Like, it's hard to target a student's learning when you don't talk about that assessment for another 2 weeks. And so it makes it hard, and almost because the institution isn't set up, it sets the teachers and the teams up for less success. So our proposal is that we want to, as Gary mentioned, we want to move our biweekly CLTs to weekly CLTs and having them for 1 hour instead of the 2 hours. And this will allow the team to meet regularly and to collaborate regularly, to work together and really form that collective practice around student learning. It gives us the opportunity to make timely adjustments so that we're not looking at work that's been done 2 to 3 weeks previous and trying to then catch the student up. And then it just gives us an opportunity to really target our response, think about what we're doing as a team, and then identify what intervention will move the student forward. And so we know that we've learned a lot through the pandemic, and we've learned a lot through the work that we're doing. And we know that one of the things that's been useful is providing times for our teams and our teachers to meet regularly. And so tonight we're proposing adjusting the calendar to offer CLTs weekly for 1 hour instead of biweekly for 2 hours. Thank you.
Questions? Jessica?
Just for those of us who didn't major in math, just want to confirm, as we're making this adjustment, this proposed adjustment, this still preserves the same amount of student learning time. It just makes the CLT time, the teacher collaboration time, much more effective and a better use of a weekly 1 hour opportunity instead of every other week. And then if something happens or someone's sick, it gets missed, right? So it's about regularizing it. It's not about taking any more or less time away from student instruction. Whoever wants to answer.
This is not about getting more time for teachers to collaborate. This is about making the collaboration more effective and timely. Yeah, that is more about timeliness than it is about more time.
Which makes sense if you're a kid who's struggling, who needs an intervention and having to wait well, we just missed it, and so it's going to be another couple of weeks, and then maybe we need more discussion and we don't have a chance to do it. So that is time lost for that student. This will speed all of that up.
Absolutely. Kids need help in real time and can't wait for our meeting 2 weeks. And meeting once a week for an hour is just more effective and timely for kids than meeting once every 2 weeks for 2 hours.
Other questions? Eric?
So if I look at this from the teacher point of view, can you kind of talk about some of the changes that they may be seeing going from kind of the current model to the next model? I'm assuming this, I guess one of my concerns is this going to be putting a lot more workload on the teachers, or are they just using their time more efficiently?
All right. So the goal is that, yes, they're using their time more efficiently. So it looks different in all of our buildings. They're all a little different. And this process kind of like aligns that. And there's basically 4 questions that they talk about in their team where they're really just looking at students. You know, one of the key essential questions to this work is, what are students learning, and how do we get them to master those skills, right? Like that is the essential conversation of the team, and how the team works together to get the students there. And so it does look different, and it will require some adjustments to some teams. Some teams are running really effective and efficient CLTs already. So it'll look different, but I think what it does is it builds that collective coalition to like, we're all in this. We're all trying to get every single student to maximize their learning and growth.
Other questions? All right, thank you very much. Next up, we have middle school social studies curriculum adoption, Mr. Bennett, and a supporting cast.
All right, thank you, Chair Allen. Good evening again. Tonight, we're excited to talk to you about our middle school social studies instructional materials adoption. Tonight, we're specifically talking about recommending for adoption 6th, 7th, and 8th grade social science instructional materials. One thing I want to be sure to do is really to thank our middle school team. You'll learn a little bit about the process they went through tonight, but they have been relentless at this in terms of wanting to get it right, taking their time, looking at a lot of different materials. And the work you'll see tonight is summarized in a few slides, but it's been hours and hours of work over a long period of time, a number of years, actually. So I just wanted to thank them tonight personally for your work on that. And then I have the easy job this time. All I have to do is hand it over. So I would like to introduce the team first. So you know Marlene Carroll. Jake Healy, he's the associate principal at Sherwood Middle School. We have Margie Schoenheit, who teaches 6th grade social studies. Laura Lackey teaches 7th grade social studies, and Megan Wilson teaches 8th grade social studies. So that's the team we brought. They're here to talk to you tonight about all the work that they've done. It's really exciting. And Marlene's going to kick it off, so I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thank you, Dr. Cordy, Board Chair Allen, and Board of Directors. Okay, so I wanted to come tonight and share a little bit about the curriculum cycle and the process that we go through. And part of that is because this team has been working really hard for the last 3 years going through this process. So every 7 years, there are new standards that come out from the Oregon Department of Education. And it's our job to develop a scope and sequence, which is like a year-long timeline, using those standards and really identifying what's essential at every grade level. We're required to teach all of the standards that are set out by the Oregon Department of Ed. And in grade level teams, in CLTs, they go through and they map it grade by grade, and then we compare so that we're vertically aligned. We don't want, our 6th grade to teach the same thing as our 8th grade because it's not very efficient. And we want our students to build on their knowledge. That's how the Oregon standards are set up. And so what the team does is they establish essential questions. Essential questions spark learning for our students. They are things that captivate them and get them engaged. And they're hard to write, and they take a lot of time and thinking, and the teams work together on doing that. And then what we do is we identify resources, which are what we're bringing here to you guys tonight. And then they start writing and aligning the lessons, using the resources, pulling them in. And throughout this time, until we get the new standards, we're in a constant cycle, which means we're constantly looking at these resources. We're gathering feedback from students. We're looking at assessment. We're writing and rewriting lessons. And we're constantly updating and thinking about things as we move through this process. And then finally, we determined if an assessment isn't right for the student, or if the instructional material doesn't actually hit the learning target, or if we need to go back and we need to push students forward in a different way because that learning isn't working, right? And we do that all within, as our team, as our social studies team in this case. And sometimes we have to change our lessons. Sometimes we alter them. Sometimes we abandon them entirely. All right, so the goals for this adoption were to do just that. They were to analyze and implement the social science standards that were released. The team created a year-long scope and sequence at each grade level. They really looked at the heart of the Oregon social science standards, which is creating culturally relevant materials and really inspiring students to be informed citizens in an increasing multicultural world. Finally, one of the last two goals of the adoption was update our outdated materials and really help students discover their interest and passion, because we know that when you're interested in what you're learning and you're passionate about it, then you just learn better and more deeply. And with that, I'm going to pass this off to Jake Healy, and he's the associate principal at the middle school, and he was working on this far before me and has more to share.
Right, thank you, Chair Allen, members of the board, Superintendent Cordy. I do have a little bit more to share, but really I know we're all waiting to hear from the teachers because they've done some great work here. So I'll be excited to hand that off and let you talk to them. So one of the things that we did, as Marlene mentioned, it was a 3-year cycle, which is fairly long because we wanted to make sure we got it right. And one of the very first things we did was we got our teachers together, and we really started to think about what do we envision for social studies curriculum in Sherwood? What do we know about the community? How do we meet those standards for excellence that have become expected within Sherwood? So we crafted a vision statement, which with a number of social studies teachers in a room, wordsmithing can take a little bit of work. But we believe we came up with something really great. And I'll highlight a few pieces after I read it here. So our vision statement was: students will become informed, empathetic global citizens who think critically about the past and present, using multiple perspectives, by acting as historians who read, write, listen, and research in order to access, analyze, and share their learning. So there's a lot packed into one sentence there. One of the things that we really were thinking about is, what are our students going to do? What is our goal for them? So you'll hear some highlights like they're acting as historians, right? So they're using multiple perspectives. They're digging in and doing the work. So it's not a passive thing to be a social studies student. There's that emphasis on reading, writing, and listening. There's that idea of past and present. So one of those new standards, some of the new standards pieces that came in were, how do we connect the past and present? That hasn't always been something that was in the social studies standards for Oregon. And so it's something our teachers were really excited about as they were thinking about those standards and the work and what we're trying to look for. And then really just that idea of, let's get the kids involved and doing this work. So you'll hear a little bit more about how we landed on what we did for resources. But it's that idea that they are going to be sharing their learning, they're going to be doing, and they're going to be very, very active while thinking critically. Because we had such lofty goals, it was a long process. Early on, back in 2018, that feels like so long ago now. So there was an Oregon Caravan. So a caravan is where publishers bring in their resources and show them off, and then teachers and teams and districts and people come in and look at those resources. We sent a team of teachers down there. They came back. They said there were 3 available at the time that were at that caravan. They brought back 2. They said, we're pretty excited about these. We think we could look into them. We worked with those publishers, got some examples of that, and really started to narrow down which one. It was actually a close vote. There were 2. We were almost 50-50. We decided to go with a pilot of something called Active Classroom. We began a pilot of that the following fall. It did not take long for us to realize it didn't quite fit our team's needs. So while it had a lot of resources, a lot of them were very, very dated. They had basically converted a lot of older materials into a digital form and then shared them as if they were new and engaging, and they weren't always very hands-on or very active. So the team had some reservations around that, and we didn't feel comfortable coming to you guys or to the community and saying, we really stand behind this product or this curricula. So we went back to the drawing board. We said, okay, what can we do? What else is out there? What may be coming that's new? And then what can we do? We have a lot of experts on our staff who maybe already know other things, or we can put together different resources that maybe do meet those standards and expectations. So we said, let's look into implementing a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And let's get in that cycle of really getting a lot of different resources on the table, bring it all together and say, what can we put together? What can we identify as the best things for our students? That involves studying the standards even deeper. So we knew the standards, but we said, let's really unpack these. Let's think about what they mean. Let's identify what ones are the most essential. As Marlene said, we teach them all, but sometimes there's ones we say, this is really important to that vision we had. How do those marry or match up? And then we worked on that scope and sequence of standards. Another step we took was thinking about inquiries. You had heard in that vision statement, there was a piece about really wanting hands-on kids doing the work, engaging as citizens, having discourse. The C3 framework is a framework that is, that's the idea behind it, is how do we get kids doing inquiry? How do they do research? How do they engage? How do they discuss? And then we took that vision and that knowledge about the C3 framework, our understanding of the scope and sequence and standards, and said, let's go back into materials. Let's see what else is out there since our original caravan. And then, so what's new? What do we already know about, or what is stuff that we've already used in pieces that maybe we need to dig deeper and identify? Are those things we want to continue with, or are those things that we really think we should look into and bring together and bring to this board and this community? And that is what these wonderful teachers over here are going to talk more about, is where did we land? And so I'm going to hand it off to Margie Schoenheit, a 6th grade social studies teacher at SMS. Thank you.
I'm in charge of cooking.
Yes.
All right. Good evening, Chair Allen, Superintendent Cordy, members of the board. As he said, I am Margie Schoenheit, and I teach 6th grade social studies at SMS and have been for about 13 years. And so the 6th grade, our focus is in the Western Hemisphere, and that is a radical change from what we have done in the past. So we focus on Canada, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, and then we finish up in South America. And we sort of follow a little routine, if you will, as we go through these different areas, where we start with geography, getting a lay of the land, and then we talk about the history and the ancient civilizations, our indigenous peoples from each of those areas. And then we talk about governments, economics, and those are kind of fun to compare with our own, just to give them kind of a deeper understanding there. Then we talk about the culture of these different places, and then current events. So what's happening right now? That's where we kind of bring the past and the present together. So we have chosen the Discovery Education platform. It does give a lot of in-depth information and lots of activities. The platform is very robust with projects, assessments. There's common, what's the word here? I don't know. I'm just going to go here to the slide. Common text, a lot of videos to support the topics, and the strategies that are used in the Discovery Education align with the AVID program. So that's real nice. The materials are carefully selected and they are updated regularly, which is better than the other options that we have. That's something really nice to get more current, updated information. And we went through a whole anti-racist check sheet, and it aligned, this Discovery Education aligned very well with the ODE's guidance. We also chose the Junior Scholastic. It's a magazine, but we also have access to the digital world there. It's nice for kids to actually have it in their hands, especially now since they've kind of been on their computers so much as of late. So that's kind of nice for them. It has current information on topics that they are interested in, things that are happening throughout the world. When we do it on the digital platform, we can change the lexile level so that students can read things at their level. There's a text-to-speech feature. as well. And when they are working online, they are able to annotate the text, highlight, make notes and whatnot. It does save it. So that's pretty cool. And my personal favorite are the monthly debates on highly engaging topics. We're going to be doing one tomorrow about cell phones. So that ought to be good. So that's sixth grade in a nutshell. Thank you.
Superintendent Cordy, Chair Allen, members of the board. My name is Laura Lackey, and I teach 7th grade social studies at SMS. Thank you so much for having us. It's truly thrilling to be at this point of this process. So I've got a big smile. Am I too far away? Okay, is this good? Okay. So thank you for letting us share. It's really exciting to be at this point of the process. So to tell you a bit about what our focus is in 7th grade, it's honestly hard to summarize because we have half of the world in a big span of time. So we focus on the Eastern Hemisphere and kind of go through different regions of the hemisphere. Our standards cover history, economics, geography, and more. And the balance we try to strike with our team is just teaching students the critical eras of history, but also just wanting them to learn more about the world and have an appreciation for different cultures. We see it as a way to kind of bring the world to our students. And our goal is just to help students be engaged global citizens who can kind of see the pivotal role that they play in the world. So we do that through exploring ancient civilizations, modern issues, and kind of other topics within the Eastern Hemisphere. We also liked the discovery education options, and I would kind of echo what the 6th grade team enjoyed as well. But something we found very beneficial to this option was that it truly has a foundational text. There's many different resources within it. So discovery education kind of provides some information that's more of an overview, but also lots of resources that can go into more depth into things that we want to study further. So it provided so many ways to teach the standards from different types of sources, including videos and images and primary sources. So it was so robust. And it's also, since it's updated, we don't have a resource that's stagnant, right? So it's going to continue to improve and change. It's also just very functional. It's very easy for teachers to find the information they were looking for and for students. So a lot of positives to that resource, which will be great to have moving forward. The 7th grade team also decided to pursue a novel study. I also teach language arts, so if it was up to me, I'd just read you all the books right now, but I know we don't have time for that. So we wanted to find a way to integrate just some engaging text to go along with some of the nonfiction and some of the more informational texts that we're studying. So we found 3 books that we're going to implement as part of our study of Asia, and they all take place in India. And something that was really wonderful about the novels that we found is they act as kind of a window into different cultures, but there's also themes throughout each that could connect with any child in Sherwood. Themes about friendship, about family, about identity, about overcoming challenges. So we're excited to have that as an option as well. We also talked about just wanting, as social studies teachers, to help students work on their literacy. We know it's so important for students to have literacy skills and be able to be strong readers and writers. So by adding in novels, we're able to incorporate some of those skills throughout the school day instead of just in language arts. All right, so that was what we're working on for 7th grade. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Allen, members of the board, Dr. Cordy. I'm Megan Wilson, and I teach 8th grade social studies at Sherwood Middle School. So 8th grade, we cover a broad spectrum of U.S. history, starting from around the 1500s all the way up through the end of Reconstruction, like 1877 era. You can see the units broken down on the slide. We go from a broad based in geography, like current geography, so kids can understand where different geographic forms are, because as we explore the history, geography provides so much context for what they're learning. All the way up, we do a whole unit on civics and government. We've done Supreme Court hearings, and we're trying to do congressional hearings next year, working with the Classroom Law Project. Current events, the Revolutionary War and the American Revolution and the American Civil War, as I tell my students. Reconstruction, Indigenous peoples, ODEs provided some lessons on Indigenous history that we incorporate, and westward expansion. And truly the focus when we're thinking about history at the 8th grade level is moving into the realm of historiography. So not so much covering this broad base of history where there's just so much to cover without enough depth, but really looking at the skills of historical knowledge, historical thinking, historical analysis. So contextualizing moments in history so that they make sense from our modern lens if you understand the context of the era, and then also corroborating sources. So looking at a primary source from one perspective and then from another perspective, and between those two, trying to establish what like the truth of that moment was from the perspectives of those people. We study basic economic principles. There's a financial standard around interest and compounding interest, and looking at how that would affect you if you were investing versus if you were in debt. And understanding and evaluating multiple perspectives. The sources that we went with were Upfront Scholastic Magazine, which is very similar to Junior Scholastic that Ms. Schoenheit talked about, Margie Schoenheit talked about. One of the things that really appealed about that is the tactile nature of having a magazine in hand with students being able to highlight and annotate and actually seeing their thinking on the page. It also has a really robust online piece as well, where they can do that same annotation and highlighting. But I found that truly the engagement when they have a piece of paper, we've seen that a lot this year, where it's hard to see their annotation on reading when they're strictly on an online platform. It has news articles, interactive websites. Speaking back to Margie's point, the debate piece is really fun. There's always two experts that are brought up to address a question, a yes and a no side with really clear points, and then the kids can bring those to a debate or discussion of their own. We do Socratic seminars regularly in 8th grade social studies, looking at historical events and then also looking at more current events. And just to echo my colleagues, we also adopted Discovery Education. The only thing I would add to what they've already said is that Discovery Education had some of the most updated vocabulary we saw in any of the curriculums. To where I was like, okay, it's clearly this is thoughtful. Like they've taken it and applied it to the era we're living in. And then supplemental nonfiction. So Napkin Finance, you can see there's a little thumbnail of a picture from Napkin Finance. When we're looking at a concept like compound interest and you're 14 years old, it's really nice to have a visual to go with it. And so this text that we've gotten for the teachers has some really nice sketch notes and infographics that we can show to kids to really explain the concepts in a visual way. I think we increasingly live in a society where like visual literacy is so important. And so we can incorporate that in their financial education. And then SHEG, Stanford History Education Group, has produced these lessons that we sprinkle throughout the year, where historians have taken primary source documents from the 19th century, which, as you can imagine, again, for a 14-year-old are a lot to sift through, but they've distilled them down into like a simple paragraph where kids can look at, you know, a perspective from 1800s and really understand what they were writing about and then corroborate it and contextualize it, as I was saying earlier. So thank you so much for your time tonight. I believe we have questions next. So what questions do you have?
Jessica.
Yeah, I just want to start by saying that I really appreciate the work that all of you do. I think social studies is so important, and I would not be sitting here or in the career that I'm in without really amazing middle school and high school social studies teachers that got me very excited about history and social science and learning and understanding. And that means you got to teach in different ways, but getting kids excited about using their voices and learning how to process information is just wonderful and exciting. And watching my own kids get excited about it and take AP classes in it is just very exciting. So I just want to start by saying thank you for the really great work that you do, because that's not always an easy subject, but it's really important. I do, as you've undoubtedly seen over the last few weeks, there's been a bit of a debate in our community about what these standards are and what they are not. And so I want to ask a couple of questions just because I think it's really, really important to have on the record what these things are. So my first question, and whoever feels most comfortable answering that, whether that's you want to kick it to Mr. Bennett or one of you wants to take it yourself, it's fine with me. But I want to clarify, our ODE educational standards, are they optional for us or are we required to teach them?
No, we are required to teach all the standards put out by ODE.
Yes. And if we chose to ignore those standards, there are both financial and actual accreditation issues with our district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the studies, the hard work that's gone on for 3 years, I'm going to repeat that, 3 years to get to this point. This work has been centered and focused on not only what's the best curriculum for our kids, how are we going to get the content that we're required to teach across, but these are aligned with those standards. There's no political or ideological agenda. This is about aligning a curriculum with the standards. Is that correct?
That's the idea behind all of our adoptions. That's correct.
Absolutely. Okay. And this material, if parents in the next few weeks want to take a look at it ahead of its adoption, is that available for people to view?
It is on the middle school website right now under the resources tab. They can go and view all the online curricula available there. They can pick up the print copies in the main office of the middle school. And there's a Google form where they can provide us with feedback.
Excellent. And that's pretty typical of how we do every adoption. Is that right?
That is standard practice for us for adoptions. Looks a little bit different with the print versus digital curriculum, but that's standard practice to put them up for review and get feedback.
Excellent. Thank you. Again, thank you very much for all of the really, truly great work that you do for our kids every day. And really appreciate the opportunity to just provide some clarity about what this is and what this is not.
Thank you. Those are important questions.
And I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm a band parent, and I'm really proud of the Sherwood High School Marching Band, and they are going to do their show in about 20 minutes. So I'm going to leave, and I don't want you to view that as any reflection on the wonderful work or presentation. It's great, but I'm going to go hear my kid play his horn. So thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Director Adamson.
Other questions? Eric?
I said one quick question about the financial literacy piece in the 8th grade. Is that new, or I don't ever recall having any financial literacy requirements ever before?
I believe it's new for the 2018 standards. Correct me if I'm wrong, and that it's embedded. Actually, all 3 grade levels have financial standards coming through. So I think that's intentional to bring personal financial literacy into the social studies classroom.
I think that's absolutely outstanding. It's amazing how many new college hires we bring in who do not have this basic financial information. I actually went and looked at the financial napkin site up there, and I actually forwarded it off to my kids going, see, this is what we were talking about.
Wonderful.
So I wanted to thank you for that. And the other thing is to kind of echo what Director Adamson was saying. It's kind of a personal story for me, is that my son's an engineering major, and they historically have seen humanities and social studies as kind of something they have to do, but not necessarily what they want to do. And when he is off in college, I found it fascinating this last year. He has to take a lot more of his humanities classes now. And these are the ones that he will not be quiet about. We call him up, we ask him, and he starts going on and on. And the interesting part for me was how he was reflecting a lot of these discussions back to discussions that they had in high school. And I'm assuming those discussions went all the way back to middle school too. So having those discussions, having it with a larger group of people with different viewpoints, I think really kind of opened his eyes and did a really service for him for how he's going to be as a citizen of this country. So thank you very much.
Other questions? Mike?
So again, I wanted to reiterate my thanks for the 3 years of work on this. It takes a tremendous amount of time, and I think you've done a really great job with this. But I wanted to ask a couple of questions. So it was mentioned that we have to align this to the state standards. Number one, are the state standards available on the website for parents to review them? And so I'll stop there.
They're currently not on the website for parents to review them, but that's a pretty quick fix. They are on ODE's website for parents to review at any time, but we certainly could post them. I think that's a good idea.
But they can find them on OEE's website.
Yes, they can.
And with your experience as teachers, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here. We've been hearing that there's problems with these ODE standards, or people are objecting to certain parts of it. Were you concerned about anything in these ODE standards when you were creating this curriculum for Sherwood? Was there any cause for concern in your years of teaching experience?
So I can speak maybe doubly to that as working on this team, but also I was a social studies teacher for about 15, 16 years, maybe 13, 14. So I'm getting old. I'm starting to forget how long it's been, but there's always been some contention around social studies standards. The previous standards had that as well. So I don't know if there's any way to say that that's a new thing. As we looked through it, there's always some that we say, you know, financial literacy was new, for example, and there's a lot of people who might argue that that's not something we should be doing, and there's other people to argue we should. I think what is most important in these standards is the skills and that idea that you heard about the discourse, the debate, the idea of multiple perspectives. And that's really what we looked at as we were aligning what we were looking for in a curriculum with those standards, because the standards are still broad enough that you can bring in all those things without saying, here's one perspective. There is no one perspective necessarily within those standards, at least as we reviewed it and as I reviewed it, I did not see that.
Okay. And just a comment, I like the financial literacy too. That's something. But anyway.
Other questions or comments? I just want to join the chorus of thanking you for the work, especially not only was it 3 years of work, it sounds like you were sold on 1 year of work or maybe 2 and it turned into 3. So thank you for the overtime effort on this as well, and especially being able to work this through in a pandemic and everything else. I really appreciate what's gone into this and the thoughtfulness that's gone into it. And I really encourage, look at the materials that are online. You know, Will Rogers once said, "It's not what people don't know that's the problem; it's what they do know that just ain't true." You know, when I when I see things like financial literacy and civics, which I keep reading, nobody's teaching, and we need to add back to the curriculum, and it's there in the curriculum, and those kinds of things. I think being familiar with what's actually there is really helpful, and certainly in the work that I do every day, people understanding that your perspective is not the only perspective, and that you need to understand other people's perspective and their story and their history to be able to have a conversation productively about an issue, I think is just a critical life skill. With that, thank you all very much.
Thank you. I believe I'm up again.
I think you are. Next up is middle school social studies curriculum adoption first read.
Okay, so this is just a formal action of recommending these titles as listed in the presentation tonight up for adoption. As I mentioned before, they are posted on the middle school's website under the resources tab for people to take a look at and review and comment on. And we'll bring them back to next regular meeting of the board for recommended adoption. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, adjustments to the 21-22 academic calendar. Mr. Everett.
Thank you, Superintendent Cordy, Board Chair Allen, and Board of Directors. So recently we brought the 2021-2022 district calendar, which to the board, which you adopted. Since that time, as you heard tonight in the MTSS presentation, we saw the need to revise the way we do our early release. And so moving that from an every other 2 hour per week early release to an every week for 1 hour early release. So this evening we present the revised calendar for first read and review. Any questions?
Questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right, closing comments. Anyone got any closing thoughts? Anything they want to say? All right, first meeting of the District Budget Committee will be Wednesday, June 2nd.